Mm.
It's a similar story when you look at what's happening in the Highlands. So I also work with Trees for Life, as I mentioned earlier. So Trees for Life has been working since the 90s to restore the Caledonian forest that once covered most of the Highlands. It's reduced to about 1 or 2% of its former extent now. And again, it's about wildlife and it's about climate, but it's about people and finding ways to actually re-people these rural areas. The Highlands have really suffered from depopulation.
So
And
Richard, so hold that thought. What we're going to do is we'll bring up a picture. So
okay.
we'll see a picture in a minute, and that will aid the conversation so people can see exactly what you mean. So this looks like rewilding in action.
This is at Trees for Life's estate near Loch Ness. So Trees for Life bought a 10,000 acre estate called Dundragon in Glen Morriston in 2008. And it raised a lot of money to buy the estate, and it's now become a pioneering rewilding project. Dundragon is an amazing place. So Trees for Life restoring the Caledonian forest, and that is done through the planting of native trees and also natural regeneration of native trees as well, helping trees to establish themselves naturally. And what you can see in this picture here is Dundragon's tree nursery. It's a specialized nursery. It's excellent at growing some very rare and hard to grow trees, as well as some more commonly found trees in the Scottish Highlands, from Scots pines to rowan, to juniper, aspen, which is rare and is struggling to grow in the wild, and so Trees for Life and birch and so on. And what we've got to have here is the trees that Trees for Life volunteers have gone out into the hills. They've collected the seeds, they've brought it back, and they've grown the trees, these baby saplings, at Dundragon. The site grows something like 60,000 to 100,000 native trees a year, and then other volunteers take the trees out into the hills for replanting and restoring the Caledonian forest. Again, to my mind, this is about people as well, because everybody who comes on Trees for Life Conservation Weeks goes away saying they had a really inspiring, uplifting time, sometimes a life-changing experience through working in a tree nursery, getting out into this beautiful part of the wild Highlands and engaging with nature and helping to bring the forest back. And when you bring the forest back, you bring the wildlife back as well, because a lot of Scotland's unique wildlife has declined alongside the forest environment.
And again, it's something you just mentioned briefly, but people going out volunteering, and you say can change people's lives. You don't know what effect, we don't know really what effect that will have on them. That could be the moment where they volunteer, one day, and the next day they may chuck in their job and get involved with nature conservation full time. These pivotal moments in people's lives where they connect with nature and they connect with this part of the world as well. It's a powerful experience.
Absolutely. I think it's hard to overstate it, because I talk about rewilding being about hope, but yes, it's about hope for tackling the nature and climate crisis, but it's about people too, and it's about individual lives, and it's really empowering. We need governments to be stepping up completely and absolutely on the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, and we should continue to advocate and put pressure on governments to deliver on their promises on those issues. But at the same time, rewilding offers a way forwards for people to start taking action, and sometimes in a big way, on a large scale. So it can range from a small community project, it can range through to a 10,000 acre estate like Trees for Life's running here at Dundragon. But that is a hugely empowering thing, because things aren't hopeless. Things are in a bad way, but they're not hopeless, and we can take action. And if enough of us take action, and we do so with enough urgency, then we can deliver some significant results. And if enough of us take action, it's still within our gift to reverse the biodiversity crisis. And if we start bringing nature back in a big way, then that offers a range of ways of tackling both the causes and the impacts of climate breakdown, because trees like these at Dundragon are superb at soaking up carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Our battered peatlands in the UK are also, when healthy, superb carbon sinks. They're amongst the best carbon sinks in the world when they're healthy. When they're damaged, like 80% of Britain's peatlands are, they actually start emitting carbon dioxide as well. And that comes back to our earlier conversation, partly about intensive grouse shooting in these places, where but also the burning of the moors for the shoots, and the drying out and the blocking of drainage ditches, and also the extraction of peat for horticultural use. All of these issues, or overgrazing by too many sheep, all of these issues kind of they degrade and damage the peatlands, so they emit CO2 rather than soaking it up.
Yeah.
But coastal areas too, rivers, wetlands, the seas, these are amazing carbon sinks, so they are if we allow them to get on with it. And then the other beautiful thing about planting trees like these on the hillsides, the bare hillsides of Scotland, which are world famous, and they are beautiful, but often they're ecological deserts because they've been stripped of their native woodlands. And as well as having a big impact on wildlife, that has other big impacts. One of which, for example, is flood runoff. So when the rain hits the hills, and especially the soils have been compacted, but if they're treeless, all of that exacerbates the flooding problems downstream. Whereas once you start replanting the trees, the soils start recovering, and the trees do a lot of soaking up of the floodwaters. So you really have a big knock-on positive benefit for reducing flooding downstream.
So I hate this term, but I'm going to use it. So you mentioned about these ecological services.
Yeah.
So is there any other funding streams coming on board? Because you say about stopping flooding. Do are water companies getting involved? We talk about carbon sequestration. Are people, pension funds, etc., paying to offset carbon, or pay? Are these other funding streams that are kind of available?
It's starting, and it's bringing positives and negatives. So if you look at some of the positives, there are some water companies starting to take action, but they could be doing a lot more, and they're bigger landowners, some of the water companies. So it'd be wonderful to see them stepping up in a bigger way. But there are some that are starting to take tentative steps. Trees for Life here at Dundragon, as part of there's a bigger scheme at play here, called Afric Highlands, and this is going to be Britain's biggest rewilding project. It incorporates Dundragon in Glenmoriston, but it's going to sweep from Inverness over to the west coast of Scotland. And again, it's people, because this is a community-led project. The ideas are bubbling up from the local community and local landowners. We're trying to bring Trees for Life and working with Rewilding Europe. We're trying to bring the landowners together to connect up. But I mentioned that just off the back of what you're saying, Cam, because one of the initiatives here has been a carbon offsetting scheme, but it's a really well thought through one. It's a carbon credit scheme. So one of the problems with carbon offsetting, so-called, is that some companies will continue with business as usual, emitting greenhouse gases to their heart's content, and then go and have some trees planted and call it offsetting. The Trees for Life have got a slightly different approach to a scheme here, whereby the companies involved are all doing their best to get down to net zero already, but they want to take positive action in the meantime. They fund some of the Trees for Life rewilding nature restoration work. The funds from that are then split with the local community. A proportion of the funds are then invested back into the local community for local community groups. And Trees for Life, and the rest goes to Trees for Life's rewilding work. So that's really innovative and pioneering and quite new. But there's a downside, which I don't want to hark on about but too much, but we do need to be aware of that in parts of the country, there are companies who are buying up land for tree planting, and sometimes these are non-native, Sitka spruce, for example, and sometimes they're calling that rewilding, or they see it as offsetting. And actually, it's really damaging, because you end up sometimes with non-native trees, and sometimes you end up with the wrong trees in the wrong place, and sometimes you end up with farmland, for example, being bought up, or other habitats getting damaged. or the land being priced beyond the local community's reach. So that really is, and it goes back to, we were talking about challenges, and that is another challenge alongside the myths, that rewilding has got really popular, it's tapping into the zeitgeist or something, and we have to be careful and very alert to the threat of greenwashing by those motivated by perhaps the bottom line, money, and for companies wanting to continue business as usual. But there are a lot of positive projects happening as well. So with a bit of research and thought, it's quite easy to identify those positive projects. Not least by organisations like Trees for Life, for example, or the work that's happening in Langham, the Langham Moor project we were just talking about.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to see, just going to play the video of this real positive story. We're going to play the video of the Langham estate, and yeah, we'll just see that now.
You may have heard about our little story of hope here in Langham, but if you haven't, here's a quick recap.
In the middle of a devastating global pandemic and the never-ending news of climate breakdown,
10,500 acres of land came up for sale on the edge of our town.
Our community decided to come together and embarked on an impossible dream.
We started a campaign to try and raise the funds to buy this land for the community, to create a vast nature reserve.
We wanted to play our part in climate emergency response, restoring nature and regenerating our town sustainably.
And together, with thousands of supporters from around the world who also believe in our dream, we made it a reality.
We raised £3.8 million in just 6 months to buy 5,200 acres of woodlands, moorlands, meadows, river and peatlands.
Together we made history and successfully brought this land into community ownership.
And now we're busy creating the Tarras Valley Nature Reserve, which is one of the largest community-led ecological restoration projects in southern Scotland.
This is our future.
And we are living proof that communities can make a difference in the face of this climate crisis.
But we're not finished yet.
We are back to finish what we started and double the size of our reserve.
We are trying to fundraise 2.2 million in 6 months to allow us to bring the remaining 5,300 acres into the community ownership.
Our vision is for this land to be restored into a biodiverse haven, a mosaic of rich habitats that are teeming with wildlife.
We want to create nature-based jobs, build ecotourism and help regenerate our town.
We know this is a big ask after all the support we have received so far, but
being able to double the size of our reserve means doubling the impact that we can have for nature, community and climate.
We won't get this opportunity again and we can't do it without you.
So how can you help us?
Please help share our message far and wide on social media.
And tell our stories to family and friends.
And please, if you can, donate to our crowdfunder.
From us here in Langham and as global citizens, thank you.
So what an inspiring video that was. But again, this is, I think, to follow on from this, this is the picture of the estate, or part of the estate, and it shows the challenges but the opportunities ahead. Because I think to some people that looks very natural, but it's probably far from it.
I think yeah. So the estate is being managed as a an intensive grouse moor over many years, but it has nevertheless managed to remain a special place. Its biodiversity is pretty good, and it's got some very important species, including hen harriers, which are the UK's most persecuted bird of prey. But a lot of the habitats aren't in a great way, and a lot of the natural processes aren't functioning like they might as well. You know, we were talking about natural processes. I kind of moved on from the answer, but I think you know, you're looking at, they're not always clearly visible, and you might be able to look at an image like that and say, well, okay, there's some moorland here, but you can see there's some sort of non-native conifers. The river there, well, it's not that straightened out, so that's a good thing. But there's scope for it. It would be good to see a lot more native woodlands, riparian woodland along the river systems. There's scope for new native tree planting, and for protecting ancient woodlands. That there is some ancient woodland on the site elsewhere that could be restored, and also just looking at those kind of natural processes. So you know, you're looking at issues like, as well, when you talk about natural processes, the water cycles and the state of the vegetation, the interactions between plants and animals, you know, the microclimate, what's the state of the soil, is photosynthesis working well? All of those are natural processes which can be reinvigorated and reinstated and kick-started through a kind of rewilding, large scale nature restoration approach, and that's all of that is to play for in Langdon Moor. There's going to be 10,000 acres with all sorts of opportunities, you know, from restoring the woodlands through to re-wetting peatlands, through to improving the river system as well.
And then I'm curious, so when you get the volunteers up there, where do the volunteers come from? I mean, is it people from the local communities? Is it large corporates having a sort of a team bonding day? Where do these sort of volunteers and volunteer groups come from? I'm just curious.
Well, for Langham, I mean, you look at the Trees for Life project from all over the world, and that's been a long-running volunteering project over 2 or 3 decades now. For Langham Moor, it's early days. The land first came into public ownership after the first stage of this amazing community fundraising campaign in March 2021, and then the other land, the other 5,000 acres, is yet to come into community ownership. We've got the money, the legal documents the I's need dotting and the T's need crossing on that. So it's early days. Most of the volunteering work has come from the local community, and that's been really inspiring to see, because the local people got together. They decided to try and buy this land, which was, you know, it was being called the impossible dream when it started. And really, you know, when I said it was a little bit bonkers early, because I look back, I was part of the team, I look back and think, did we really think we were going to raise £6 million to buy 10,000 acres for a small town in southern Scotland? Somehow it happened.
So can I ask about that? Because to me, like, I couldn't imagine how one would raise £6 million. I mean, obviously, kind of what is the average donation? Are donations from all over the world? I mean, I'm really curious how you go from 0 to 6 million.
So am I, in hindsight. But no, I look seriously. I look back and I think, well, we kind of jumped into this thing, and hope is a powerful motivator. And there were times when it felt seriously at risk. And you thought, well, we're going to do. And there's been other projects that haven't succeeded. Similar kind of projects, that not necessarily as big as this one. Partly it was driven by a public crowdfunder. The crowdfunder was only one part of the approach, though. There was a lot of outreach to major funders. I think the crowdfunder was tremendously important. I mean, for both stages of the appeal, it raised more than £200,000. But it was about something more. I mean, every pound counted. But the outpouring of support from thousands of people around the world, some of which you saw messages from people saying on the crowdfunder pages saying, you know, I can't really afford this. But look, I'm putting in £5, I'm putting in £10 because I think what you're doing is so wonderful. All of that just was amazing for driving the team forwards. And I think it also sent a really strong message to big donors, major donors, that this, this was a serious, inspiring project of hope. And then we worked with a number of trusts and charitable institutions to raise the rest of the money. The Scottish government run a initiative called the Scottish Land Fund, and they put in £1 million in both stages of the appeal. That wasn't a given when we started, and
but momentum's a strong thing, isn't it? Momentum.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, no, absolutely, Dan. I mean, the Scottish Land Fund came in on that first stage, and at that point, you think, well, can we £6 million? They put in the Scottish Land Fund. We were kind of hoping for more, to be honest, but they were restricted by what they could do, and they put in the Scottish Land Fund, £1 million. That was a game changer, and it gave us momentum. And in turn, you can then go to other big funders and big and charitable trusts to say, look, we've got this from the Scottish Land Fund. The crowdfunder is going gangbusters. There's huge support here, and then we have another trust come in with, well, okay, here's £300,000, another one's at £500,000. That makes it sound easy. It really wasn't easy. That was a lot of work. You have to. The team in Langham did an amazing job, because you have to go in. You've got to get your ducks lined up. You have to know what you're talking about, and you have to demonstrate you're serious and you've really thought this through, because people don't hand over £500,000 lightly. But slowly but surely we got there. It was nail biting. The first stage of the appeal, where we raised the first £3 million or so, the first 5,000 acres of land, we got over the line, I think, in the last 24, 48 hours. The Woodland we've been talking to the Woodland Trust, and they came in with, I think it was £200,000, and I think that was in the last 2 days. And then we had stage 2, where this time we were trying to raise £2 million for another 5,000 acres, and we got that. It was literally really it was when the deadline was reached. It was the weekend of the deadline. We've been having conversations with some philanthropists and some big donors, and the John Muir Trust and 2 other philanthropists, and it all got lined up in the last. It was bang on the deadline, really, the weekend of the deadline. So yeah, that was a roller coaster, but one of the most inspiring projects that I'm very proud to have been involved in. It's just an inspiration, and it's going to be a brilliant place, the Tarras Valley Nature Reserve in Dumfries and Galloway, for people to visit.
Wow. I'm just casting my mind back to what it must have been like in the office on that last weekend. I'm getting sweaty palms just listening to your explanation. I don't know what it would have been like in the office, like, just looking at that counter getting ever closer to £2 million.
When we got there, one of my colleagues on the team burst into tears with relief, because it was like, we didn't know. 2 or 3 weeks before, we thought we were going to pull it off, but you just didn't know for sure.
So we've just been looking at the Langham estate, and that's obviously on a massive scale. And to go back to a word that's been used probably about 100 times in this podcast so far is sort of, communities and smaller projects. And you're involved with Little Green Space. Do you want to tell us more about that? Because again, I mean, I'm really interested to find out more about it, as well as my listeners, really.
So Little Green Space began in 2008. My wife and I set it up as a voluntary project and a community project, and to this day we do it all. We work on Little Green Space in our spare time. I keep using the word hope. I think Little Green Space really has been about hope and about people. Yes. Again, trying to tackle the nature and climate crisis. We did a lot of community work, working with local schools, for example, to plant mini orchards and small wildflower meadows and bee and butterfly gardens in school grounds. And we work with several local schools and to create food growing areas for the kids as well, through to working to create community orchards where I live in the Derbyshire Dales, and working with others. Also on the practical side of things, like we constantly just try to punch above our weight, because part of this is about trying to show what's possible and how people can have hopefully have an outsized impact. That things aren't hopeless. We can all make a difference. I'm a big believer in one person can make a difference, but loads of us working together, millions of us working together, we can change the world.
Yes.
We do
Now,
need.
that sounds really cliche, but that is true. It is true. We can change it. We can.
We can, and it's the only way. It's got to be teamwork. It's got to be a lot of people working together. A lot of the problems have been created not necessarily by individuals, but we've all been part of a society that has seen the ransacking of the natural world. A lot of that has been allowed by governments, and big business have driven it forwards. And it's completely, I think, absolutely the case that we need government, we need big business cleaning up their act and driving things forward on the nature of the climate crisis. You need that system change. But at the same time, individual
we can't
change,
wait for that.
We can't wait for that. Absolutely. We can't. And if enough of us get involved, that sends a really powerful signal to decision makers and policy makers. And as consumers, we make enough noise, then the companies start listening. We need to push back, and we need to be empowered. And I think there are all sorts of things we can do in our daily lives that are empowering and do all that. But equally, and this is part of what Little Green Space has been about, it's about we can bring nature back in our own backyards, in our gardens, in our communities, in a window box on our windowsill we want. That's really good for us. And from those actions, you're doing something really positive for the local biodiversity and for local wildlife. It might be a life-saving difference for your local hedgehog if you've got a scruffy area, or the fence between yourself and your neighbour has got a CD-sized hole for hedgehogs to come through because they've got big territories. But this is a species that's in massive decline. It could be extinct within our lifetime. Pollinating insects, their numbers are crashing through the floor, partly because we've lost 97 or 98% of wildflower meadows in Britain in living memory since World War II. Yeah. But we've got a gazillion gardens. I think something like 6 million gardens in Britain alone. There's all sorts of community spaces, and there's all sorts of spaces managed, as we were talking about earlier, by local councils where things could be a bit wilder. We bring the wildflowers back. We rather than planting kind of non-native showy flowers that do nothing for biodiversity, we bring nectar-rich plants back, and we create feeding stations for bees and butterflies. And then,
I want to stick on that. I'm laughing in a way because that resonates with me. Like, as obviously I do this podcast, but I'm primarily a garden designer.
Right.
And the day, and I laugh at it because I look back at some of my previous work, and I look at the work of, as one example, as our profession, and there's all this very flowery, bloomy, lovely, aesthetically pleasing arrangements of plants that are trying to mimic, if that's possible, how plants grow in the wild, but completely bloody useless. And well, not completely useless, but they're not as useful as real biodiverse, structurally complex spaces, and I think that's where perhaps we need to head.
Well, I think, I think if things bring people pleasure and there's an aesthetic benefit and gardens enjoy it, of course there's space for different approaches. But what I would advocate is balance, because I think the balance has swung too far the other way.
Yes.
And a lot of our natural vegetation has suffered as a result. And it also, I think, loops back to that neat and tidy mindset that we probably got the Victorians to thank for, but we still maintain to a degree that isn't really healthy in this country. It's not healthy for nature. So if we just played it slightly different, we can have a mix. We can have a mix of habitats and approaches in our gardens and space, and in our local authorities could be doing the same in our parks and on the roadsides and on road islands, where you think, well, you've planted those, but how about we have a few nectar-rich species or native species here? How about we have a swathe of beautiful wildflowers being allowed to grow, or even the small things like dandelions and clover, which can be brilliant, for bees and pollinating insects, and we depend on those insects for our food. So much of our food, a huge proportion of our food, we completely rely on the work of pollinating insects to produce that food. So, if we just dandelions alone, they support more than 50 different species of insects, and early in the season they're brilliant for bumblebees, for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, you know what, in March, take a look around. It's say February, March. Take a look around and imagine. This is a weird thing to say. I can't believe I'm saying.
No, go on.
Imagine you're a bumblebee. But imagine you're a bumblebee. From a bumblebee's perspective, you can only fly for 40 minutes between feeds. That's all you've got. So where are you going to find your next food? And when you look at the landscape in that way, you realize what we've done over the decades. We've taken away 98% of the wildflower meadows. We've now got intensified agriculture everywhere. The councils think, oh, okay, here's some green space. Let's mow the life out of it repeatedly. As a bumblebee, you look around, where's my next food supply coming from? And then if you go to people's gardens and you've got the neat and tidy approach, and there's no nectar-rich plants, well, that ain't good. The bees need to eat, and if the bees eat, the bees survive, then we eat and we survive.
And I feel that it's getting the message across, and that every small intervention helps. Every small patch of, even if it's a meter by meter square of a wildflower seed mix, the bottom of your garden, is vitally important. And I think and I'm saying that to people listening to this, and I'm saying it to myself, that you can think, well, unless I'm doing something on a large scale, it's not important. But it's not. It's about that it's small interventions, that connectivity across the landscape.
So I think, that there are different arguments at play which both carry dangers. Now, some people say, look, we need system change, we need big scale. Don't worry about the small stuff. We need massive change on the climate crisis and the. Yes, we do, but you can't dismiss the power of the individual or the power of small changes too. Equally, you don't want to slide the trap of just saying small changes alone are going to make a difference, because they won't. But on another level, every intervention, absolutely counts. It's going to count for your local biodiversity, and it's going to count for you, because if you're bringing wildlife, a lot of people really found this during the dark days of the pandemic as it unfolded during 2020, where people were reconnecting with nature, and when they suddenly, because of lockdown, people were wanting natural spaces and finding a new love of nature. And if you allow nature to thrive, and I just outside my garden, this is true, like that, we're by a rough field, and which has been part of the Little Green Space project actually, and we've lived here for 20 years, and I've been desperate to see a barn owl, and I've heard them once, and my family have seen them once during snowy weather. Last night, this is absolutely true. Last night, I went down to our compost bins, I saw a shape, I turned around, and it was a barn owl gliding across the field about, I don't know, I'm not very good at distances, but maybe 20, 30 feet, whatever that is in meters, away from me. It was stunning. I mean, absolutely beautiful bird. It was just one of those moments. And I might be slightly atypical, but I'm trying to illustrate the point that nature is an amazing thing. It can bring a real feel good. It's really important for us. So I think all those small interventions make a difference for species and nature, and they give the bees a chance. Equally, it's really good for us. We're doing ourselves a big favor. And then on a bigger level, people defend what they love. David Attenborough said this. People are going to go out and defend what they love. So the more you get people to engage with nature in their patch, whether it's in their garden or in their local park, the more chance you've got of getting people to engage in the bigger issues. And we're really seeing that now. So when's the podcast? When will this podcast?
So the podcast is going to be coming out. So we're recording it on, what are we, the 12th of October. It'll be out late November, early December, probably.
So this might seem like ancient history. Who knows what's going to be happening? But right now, as we record this, we have the government run by Liz Truss seemingly launching an attack on nature that all of the big environmental NGOs are describing as the biggest attack on nature in their lifetimes. So they're looking at scrapping something like 570 environmental laws. We've got investment zones being proposed, which with landscape protections going to be thrown out. We don't know what impact that's going to have on the natural protected areas like national parks. And we've got this brilliant scheme it's a silver lining of Brexit environmentally. I mean, there's been a lot of problems with Brexit environmentally, but a big silver lining. has been the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which will encourage farmers to create nature-friendly spaces alongside growing food. And that will be, it could be world-class, it's a generational opportunity, and they're looking at reviewing it, diluting it. We don't know what's going to happen. And then we've got fracking, and then we've got the sewerage. Where I was going with all this is that what's really interesting at the moment is, although it would be good to see a lot more national coverage of this issue, go on social media, it's everywhere, from the big NGOs like the National Trust and the RSPB, who don't usually speak out on these things.
Yes.
But there's a pushback happening, and you're only going to get those pushbacks and that defense of nature in a big way when you need to really step up. If people love nature and they care and they realize it's important. So for me, you know, that's another reason why every wildlife garden, everyone who decides, okay, I've got a garden, I'm going to make another square meter a little bit wilder, I'm going to have a scruffy corner, I'm going to do something for wildlife. I'm not going to mow the edges of my lawn for this winter. I'm going to leave it for hibernating insects, or to give, you know, overwintering insects and so on, and invertebrates a chance. All of that, it really adds up, because you're creating small practical change, you're creating bigger societal change, and beyond that, on a landscape scale, we need wildlife corridors too. So you need these big rewilding projects like NEP or Trees for Life Dundragon Estate, or the Langham Initiative Estate, the Langham Initiative's Tarras Valley Nature Reserve. But you also need corridors and nature-rich, nature recovery areas and zones and corridors across the country. Because I, you know, probably should have said at the start of the podcast, or perhaps I did, I don't remember, but I might be repeating myself, apologies, but Britain's one of the most nature depleted countries in the world.
You didn't, but it's worth saying. And
we're right down, bouncing along the bottom of the global league tables. One of the very respected reports called State of Nature ranked us 189th, I think, out of 218. And in terms of Europe, we're one of the most nature depleted countries in Europe. And you know, some of that, there's a lot of reasons for that. So intensification of farming and urbanization, this neat and tidy approach, development. But you are seeing this big pushback to try and bring nature back. We can do it. We've got the space, and we've got the ability, and the desire is there. You know, we're one of Europe's least wooded countries. There's huge scope for increasing our woodland cover in a big way, and for fixing those damaged peatlands we were talking about earlier, and for fixing our coastal areas, and bringing the wonder of nature back too. I mean, just on that note, if I've got,
yeah, of course, can you? Yeah,
we were talking a little bit earlier about I was talking about apex predators. They're kind of myths, and people talk about, oh, wolves, bears. You know, there aren't going to be wolves. There aren't going to be bears. Nobody's seriously campaigning for bears. Wolves aren't coming back anytime soon. You'd have to ensure you've got the habitat, and they've got a terrible PR reputation. But we do have a problem, because there's something called a trophic cascade, and a trophic cascade is, we're talking about the kind of the web of life.
Yes.
You need apex predators at the top for an ecosystem to function properly.
Yes.
We don't have any left, and that's partly the reason. We talk about natural processes as well. I mean, this has an impact. It's partly why so much of Scotland is lacking in forest cover, because we've got too many deer eating too many trees with impunity. There's no apex predators left. There is a conversation happening about reintroducing the Eurasian lynx. Now, there's a Trees for Life, who I work with, and Scotland the Big Picture, and another project called the Lifescale Project. They're running this really exciting project. I'm touching on this because, to me, this is partly about the excitement of rewilding as well, because we live in this nature-depleted landscape where a lot of the wonders of the natural world are missing. Me seeing a barn owl for the first time in 20 years, I'm sure in the 1950s I'd have been seeing a barn owl in my area more often, I'm convinced. And I'd be seeing more bees and butterflies. On another level, we don't have any apex predators left. And a lynx, they don't attack people. There might be some issues, and you need to ensure you've got the habitat. Well, actually, we know we've got the habitat in Scotland. We've got the studies. We know Scotland, the Highlands and Argyll could support a population of 400 or 500 Eurasian lynx. You've got to bring people with you. There's been a links to, so the Trees for Life and the other two, Scotland the Big Picture, Lifescale, that we've been running this Links to Scotland project. And the first step was to talk to lots of different stakeholders, including farmers and shepherds and crofters and smallholders, to get to weigh up people's attitudes and to communicate more about the lynx, because there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah.
There's definitely, we found there's an appetite for more conversations, and that's where we're at the moment. And Scotland, the big picture, are currently running a really good social media thread about the lynx and about its benefits and about the species. It's an amazing species. We'd rarely see it. It's really secretive. They're scared. They're shy of humans. They're ambush hunters. They're primarily in the woodlands, prey on deer. Probably the big impact wouldn't be so much the numbers of deer they take. It'd be more the fact you've reinserted that natural process. You create an element of fear in the landscape. The deer know the lynx are there, keeps them on the toes, and they don't overgrow.
What do they call it? The ecology of fear, isn't it?
It's the ecology. Yeah, it's the ecology of fear, and so the woodlands then start regenerating. And I think you mentioned Yellowstone, Dan, earlier with the wolves. But what happened there? The short version of the story is they brought the wolves back. Before long, that I talked about a trophic cascade, and that's the positive ripples through the ecosystem, which we can't predict, but they can be tremendously exciting and fascinating and have all sorts of benefits. And that's what happened in Yellowstone, where the wolves came back. That had an impact on some of their prey species, which stopped overgrazing some of the woodlands. Then the woodlands started coming back around the river systems. That benefited the fish and the invertebrates, and it went on. And suddenly there was this blossoming of biodiversity because you brought the wolves back, the apex predator back to the ecosystem. Again, we're not ready for wolves in Britain, not anytime soon. But with the lynx could be a serious possibility, and it could happen in our lifetime. It could happen in the next 10 years if we want it to. A lot of it is attitudinal again, and I'll stop talking. But I think we talked about some things earlier, and one of the challenges is attitudes. We're an island nation, and we've become used to that neat and tidy. We've become used to living without certain species, and to be living with degraded habitats. That's partly because of something called shifting baselines, where we all just think, oh, the way it is now is the way it's always been. No, it isn't. Nature's been taken away from us, but we just don't see it. And our parents and our grandparents' generations and the generations before that would have been living in a much, much richer natural world than we are at the moment. But I
look at if we were going to have this conversation 20 years ago, and we were going to say there would be I'm not saying it's an apex predator, but I'm saying if we were to consider that there'd be bison in the Kent countryside, and water buffalo just outside of Cambridge at Kingfisher Nature Reserve, I'd have laughed at you, or it would have seemed totally, it would have beyond the pale, really.
And I still can't quite believe we've got bison back in the corner of Kent. I mean, they're in an enclosed area, but wow, bison, it's amazing. And it goes on. These stories of success. I mean, beavers are back. We drove beavers to extinction 400 or 500 years ago. Beavers are tremendous they're called ecosystem engineers. They're brilliant. They manage their environment. They create wetlands, benefit all sorts of species. We drove them to extinction about 400 or 500 years ago. They're back in Scotland.
But to go back to the attitude, though, see a time where the lynx or a wolf or whatever goes from nasty, the worst thing since to we've reintroduced them, and now we can see the benefit. So they may they may kill 40 sheep per year or whatever, but the story, I hate the term to commodify it, but the PR around the lynx or the wolf is outweighed.
Well, and I don't think no one should be dismissive of that. There would probably be some degree of impact on sheep, and that can have an emotional impact on farmers, and you can't dismiss that. But equally, it's about balance, because we're wrecking our ecosystems, we're wrecking the natural world. It isn't working properly, and that has an impact on all of us, and that has an emotional impact on us all as well. And it has an economic impact on communities, because they're missing out on nature-based economic opportunities. Bringing back the lynx would almost certainly, when you look at Europe, you can see it, would almost certainly be a tourism draw and a money earner for local communities.
That's the rewilding around in Romania, isn't it? They bought the Lynx back.
Their Lynx is back in quite a lot of European countries now, yeah, and from right to Italy, Switzerland, and these are often more densely populated areas. Switzerland's a really good comparison. You have to look at what's they're in Norway, they're in Switzerland, they're in Italy. Switzerland's a good comparison. They're probably the way agriculture is run in Switzerland is more similar to, say, to Norway than Norway is to Scotland. And you look at that and you think, well, probably, by the way, the Lynx will be tagged, you'd monitor, you'd GPS track them, you'd monitor the project, and you'd have a trial first of all. But you look at what's happening in Switzerland, they are coexisting with Lynx in more densely populated areas than Scotland is. And I've talked to several journalists and conservationists and others in Europe who've talked. People don't think about these issues as much as we do in Britain, because we're this island nation, and we just go, what, we're going to bring back the Lynx, because these animals cross borders, and they were kind of there anyway, or they're coming back and their numbers are increasing. And
sorry, is it the vocal minority? Is it the Daily Mail readers? Is it the vocal minority? Sorry, I'm not to discredit all Daily Mail readers, but
I don't want to be dismissive of people's opinions, because they're all opinions are valid in community, and there might be legitimate fears and concerns in communities. I think you absolutely get a lot of pushback from certain groups. I wouldn't say it's necessarily Daily Mail readers, but it is for sure some elements of the farming community, certainly the farming unions, who the NFU Scotland have been willing to talk about these issues, but they do keep pushing back. A lot of farmers, they don't represent all farmers. A lot of farmers can see the benefits. A lot of farmers now are starting to rewild their marginal land, for example. And I really resist this kind of the split between conservationists and rewilders and farmers. It isn't like that, because a lot of people are both, and a lot of farmers are really passionate about the natural world. But the NFU, unfortunately, tends to be quite conservative and not always as open-minded as it might be on these issues, and it pushes back quite hard, and it has a lot of influence with decision makers behind the scenes. It's sad, because at the end of the day, farmers are going to be in the front line. They already are in the front line of the nature crisis and the climate crisis. We've seen it this year with the droughts and the heat waves. And next we'll be having floods, and farmers are getting hit again and again and again. And by restoring the natural world, we bring back hope, and we create a better functioning ecosystem, and that benefits us all. There's space to grow food, and there's also space, for farmers to make a living through diversification and through proper subsidies. And if you did bring back the Lynx, for example, just like beavers, you need to look at mitigation schemes for sure, and you need to look at compensation for farmers, and you also need to acknowledge maybe the financial compensation isn't always enough. There's going to be an emotional impact. Got to recognise that, but we've got to work together and not create these kind of culture wars and false boundaries between different elements of society. We're all in this together. There's space for farming, but we need to have space for nature. Nature too, and it isn't it isn't the economy or nature. It's actually, you need nature for a healthy. If you want a thriving economy, you need thriving nature.
I was going to carry on with the podcast, but I don't think we can. That gets to the nub of it, doesn't it? You should have a thriving economy, you need thriving nature, and it's completely ridiculous that needs even to be said. It should be just as read, as intuitive as breathing. You know what I mean? Like, I can't. No, I'm not going to get political. I was going to say we're perhaps part of the anti-growth coalition. You see,
I think, but I think, politics comes into everything. I see some people on Twitter and social media saying, well, politics, and keep politics out of it. And the RSPB, and the National Trust, I've seen some politicians pushing back, saying, oh, don't get partisan. But I don't think it's not about party. Well, for some it's about party politics, but it doesn't need to be about party politics. It's politics in the broader sense, but all of our politicians of every shade and every party, we need some red lines you don't cross. Yes. And one of them is destroying the natural world. We need to be restoring nature big time, not wrecking it further. And whether you know, I don't think that's party political. You know, and I think we need. You know, this is okay. This is my opinion. Others might disagree. I think things have changed in this country a little bit since probably Brexit, and then the kind of the Trump, and then the Johnson approach to politics, and now the Truss approach has exacerbated that. We need to get beyond this thing where you're either with us or you're against us. We had all the, you know, you're a Remainer or you're a Leave and Brexit, and all of that seems to have embedded itself quite deeply, so that it's become harder to take on the government without being seen to be party political. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember it being like that before. I think when, for example, you had the real pushback against the poll tax, and sorry, I'm well off piece.
No. I didn't think we would get onto the poll tax in this podcast.
Well, I know, but I brought it in.
Let's go down.
I'm going to bring in the Iraq. I'm going to bring in the Iraq War as well. But when there was huge public pushback on the poll tax under Margaret Thatcher, there was huge public pushback against the Iraq War under Tony Blair, yes. and I don't recall that being seen as party political or partisan. And to my mind, the climate and the nature crisis, it's the same thing. We need to get beyond this slightly cultish approach to our political, you know, sensibilities, yes. and take a broader, be political because you have to be, because politics affects everything, yes. but you don't need to be party political to take on government decisions. The government are in power now. They were going to do something really, really good with the environmental land management scheme, and they still could. And if they do, I'll be first in line to praise that. But equally, if they keep dismantling nature, I'm going to be first in line to shout about it.
Yeah.
You know, so let's all stand up for nature. And I think, you know, I think I said this before. When you have organisations like, you know, the National Trust and the RSPB and the Woodland Trust starting to speak out, this is unheard of. They don't do this usually. So something is going badly wrong. So yeah, we, you know, again, it's in all of our interest to stand up for the natural world. And if we stand up for nature, we stand up for the economy, long-term sustainable, long-term economy, and our health and well-being, and true wealth as well. You know, you know, because you know, growth at all costs will just make us poorer.
Yeah. On that note, Richard, that is the best time to finish, I reckon. Top man. Thank you very much for your time. I've really, like I say, I've wanted to have you guys on for a couple of years now, and I really appreciate your input into this podcast.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Dan. Thanks
for your time, mate. See you.
Thank you.